I'd like to welcome you to today's session. My name is Kim Finney, and I am co-founder of the Rural Youth Catalyst Project, along with my colleague, Kathy Moxon. We are super excited to be offering this series today and really grateful to JFF, or Jobs for the Future, for partnering with us to create resources and to think about particularly the needs for rural and Native young people programs and communities. This is a two-part series that's entitled More Than Credentials of Creating Apprenticeship Opportunities for Rural and Native Youth. And today we will be focusing on building the foundation for those opportunities and thinking about work-based learning in a rural context. And then next week, we hope you will join us again and hear from an additional group of folks that really drills into looking at employer engagement, particularly in a rural context. And that will be next Thursday, May 26th, from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. We're thrilled to have you all. Please keep just dropping your name and where you're from into the chat. It's just terrific for everyone to get to have a sense of who else is out there. So let's get started. We know that apprenticeships provide amazing opportunities for individuals to gain real skills and credentials while learning on the job. They offer a structured, systematic launch into middle skill and middle income career pathways that can launch particularly a young person for a lifetime. So rightfully so, there's a great deal of focus and emphasis on creating apprenticeships across the country right now. And it's been momentum that's been growing both at the federal and state level, but also within the education world and the workforce world across the public, private, and nonprofit sector. And with this emphasis, there's a fair amount of funding that has already become available and will be coming available in the coming year, maybe years, plural, and particularly funding for apprenticeships that includes a focus on youth and opportunity youth. Now, when we say, let's just pause for a moment, and when we say opportunity youth, we're talking about 16 to 24-year-olds in particular, and young people that are out of school and out of work. And in that, we mean have not, for the most part, completed high school. And so they need a very particular set of support systems and multiple on-ramps to be able to re-engage and pursue education and career pathway opportunities. However, all of this is awesome, but for many rural communities and rural programs, school districts, whatever hat you're wearing in a rural setting, we're finding ourselves, trying to grab these funding opportunities and also to create these actual program opportunities, particularly apprenticeships for our young people. But mostly there hasn't been a chance to lay the necessary groundwork. What needs to happen and goes into then being able to successfully build apprenticeship opportunities. And so along the way, we know that programs are encountering a range of challenges, and particularly challenges that are unique or specific to rural communities and their economies. So again, we're really excited and grateful to you, Miriam, and Vanessa and the team at JFF to join us in having this conversation and letting us drill in and focus on rural communities. And today we're going to explore what those challenges are, but also how to create robust work-based learning systems and build those relationships to set you up successfully.
Hi, Leslie. So we're talking about graduation and
thank you. We had a mute moment. You may be joining us from a school district or a WIB or some sort of intermediary. If you're joining us wearing a rural hat, hopefully you will hear experiences that resonate with you and information that helps you overcome some of the challenges, as well as get to hear about some of the ideas and innovations. And again, feel like you're with some kindred spirits. If you're joining us and you've been wearing an urban focused hat and are looking at partnering with or serving rural communities or rural programs, we hope that you'll also feel like you're with some kindred spirits, and you will learn what makes it a little bit unique and some of the ways that you can better help strengthen those rural communities and rural partnerships you have and better support those programs. Now, feel free to drop into the chat box questions that you have, comments as we go along, and we'll do our best to pull those forward while we're in conversation. We'll also give points, particularly towards the end, to just try to open it up and respond to questions. Depending upon how many people are on, we'll all become unpinned, and you'll be able to, we'll all sort of be in community together. So we will do our best. And you will also have our information, and feel free to contact us afterwards. We love to hear from you, and we love to collaborate. So enough for me. Let's get started. I'm really excited to introduce our panelists. We have Miriam Sullivan. Miriam is a director at JFF Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning. Thank you, Miriam, for joining us. We have Amanda Bastoni. Amanda is a CTE specialist and the educational research scientist, and she is with CAST. We have Kathy Taylor. Kathy is the executive director of the California Heritage Youth Build Academy. And we have Kara Johnson, and Kara is the program director at the Heart of Oregon Core. Thank you all for being with us. Let's jump right in. Miriam, you lead JFF's work with the Center on Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning, you along with a team of folks. I know that you were about to say that. And we're talking about work-based learning and how that is part of the, not just the groundwork, but the continuum of and connected with apprenticeships. So let's just start at the very beginning. What is work-based learning?
Well, before I jump into what is work-based learning, first of all, thank you for having me present with the other panelists in this session. I'm thrilled to be here to talk about this topic. At JFF, at the Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning, over the last 3 years, we've been really intentional at focusing on bringing in opportunity youth into the promise of apprenticeships, right? Like, apprenticeship has been a model really centered around adults. The average age is 29 years old. So we thought about really being intentional in focusing on opportunity youth. And we have developed a network of organizations across the country, both rural and urban, that are working toward that goal. One of the things we realized at JFF is that there's a need for capacity building across the country. And we're doing just that at the center in providing resources and in helping organizations, community-based organizations, youth-serving organizations connect, gather resources, and just learn about these models that are working well for their context. But I will jump into your question and wanted to give that framing just about the work that we've been doing over the last 3 years. But work-based learning is an approach to training where students, learners, or workers complete meaningful tasks within a work setting. We've done a lot of work around this at JFF, and one of the things we learned is how we think about work-based learning really matters. We think about it in 4 buckets. And I'll kind of dig into these as we continue to have conversation, but we think about it career exploration. So that's the preparation for work-based learning. And then there's the exposure piece. That's your job shadows, the company tours. And then the bulk of our work at the center really focuses around career engagement. I was muted, so I don't know what you heard last. around the 4 buckets, but I talked about the exposure piece, career engagement, which is where our work at the center really focuses. So that's your internships, your co-ops, your pre-apprenticeships. And then there's the career experience piece, which is where your apprenticeships fall in, and on the job training. My last comment with your question is one of the reasons we really wanted to focus on work-based learning is one of the things we do know is that there's a lack of access to work-based learning, and it really limits career prospects and economic mobility for millions of youth, and in particular youth in rural settings. So happy to jump in and set that baseline with sort of like that baseline definition of work-based learning.
Awesome. Thank you, Miriam. And we lost you, but just for a brief second on mute, so don't worry. Amanda, let's pull you in. Your work has been focused on educational equity, and now you're with CAST, which brings a UDL approach to this. You've spent years building career and tech programs, both within school and out of school youth, and particularly in a rural setting, scaling it across New Hampshire. What would you add to the definition that Miriam shared, and what's your perspective on work-based learning?
Yeah, thanks, Kim. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Miriam, for sharing that definition. Totally agree with that idea of a continuum. And the only thing that I would add in is I think we need to acknowledge that, especially in rural communities, work-based learning is also a continuum for the employers. So we need to just be cognizant that our employers, especially when they're, maybe smaller businesses, smaller industries, might need a lot of support around onboarding, around supporting our learners, especially our learners in career and technical education. We call them our special populations, or our learners with disabilities. So just making sure that we're really thinking of work-based learning as a continuum, both for the learner and the educator, but also for the employer. And Kim, if it's okay, I have one quick story to share. Are we encouraged to tell those?
Tell stories.
Okay, so for example, I have a learner, a teacher in New Hampshire who had a young man who was deaf, who wanted to go out and do an internship. And because the teacher in this very rural community had a great relationship with the local cabinet maker, he was able to facilitate that experience. But I will say the employer was nervous, had a lot of questions, wasn't sure how to make this experience beneficial for everyone. And so the teacher really had to fill that role of, doing the training, right, for the employer. And so just a last thing I'll add is that that learner, Isaiah, he did great. In fact, they hired him, and the only issue was that he ended up working so hard. The employer said that some of the other folks were embarrassed, or that he was outworking them all. So it was a great experience. But I just wanted to say that's a big lift for teachers, or for professionals who are trying to facilitate these experiences, as Miriam said, for our learners. So I'm going to share 2 resources in the chat that are just free module for employers to learn how to take on interns or work-based learning experiences, and also just a quick video that will help orient them. So I just wanted to share that.
Super. Thank you. Kara and Kathy, let's pull you both in here. And Kara, maybe we'll start with you, but I want to get both of your perspectives. You are both on the ground, working locally, and you have designed and you're leading education and workforce training programs with rural and native opportunity youth. So tell us about how work-based learning fits in, and why that's been important for your young people.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. So Heart of Oregon Corps is a conservation corps based out of Central Oregon, and we serve young people from the native community all the way to the urban community of Bend, Oregon. And so during that time, we have 6 programs. We have natural programs in natural resources. We have programs in construction, which is also an Oregon Labor and Industry pre-apprenticeship program. We also have programs in child and youth development and retail training. And so, when I first started with Heart of Oregon Corps, it was 2 programs. conservation, in the conservation corps is the natural resources program and the construction program. And we've been able to grow based on the needs of our communities. So as we've been adding these additional programs, they've been filling the niche of what is happening in Central Oregon. And so right now, like in child youth development, not only is it's a child care desert here, and so it's very hard for families and parents to find child care resources, but it's also been, it's a great opportunity for young people to jump in where there's a lot of jobs that are hopefully going to be opening up. Also too, we take into consideration with our youth build program that our young people are working towards their GEDs and high school diplomas. So we do serve opportunity youth in all of our programs, but we serve young people with disabilities. We serve young people who have, who are like 1 foot in the door, 1 foot out of the door of high school and want to complete their GEDs or high school diplomas, to youth who are wanting that pre-apprenticeship piece that they're just not getting at their local high schools. So we have several partnerships throughout Central Oregon. And Amanda, yes, we have partnerships with employers. We do internships with our young people. We do work experience placements. We build affordable housing. So we're building houses from the ground up. We also, all of our young people are mostly AmeriCorps members. So we're also doing community service in all of our communities that we serve our young people. I guess that's it. Anything else?
So Kara, let me just follow up with you for a second. So the child and youth development pathway that you were just talking about, just quickly walk us through what that is and how you've built work-based learning into that.
Yeah, so it's fairly new to us just in the last 6 months. And so it's been from the ground up how we've built it. No, there's been some other high schools that have dabbled in it, but they don't provide that work experience piece. They just provide the curriculum piece or the academic piece. And so we're doing both. So our young people first, when they come into our program, they actually get the curriculum and we serve the curriculum. We go through the curriculum. It's about 6 to 8 weeks that we're doing this curriculum with the young people, and it's very trauma informed. And it's basically, and it's also lots of hands-on stuff. So like field trips, one field trip that we've taken our young people on is just after they've learned a piece about like communication, what are some field trips that you can be doing with the youth that you're working with or the children you're working with? So they go to the park and they do observations at the park of how parents are interacting with their own children while at the park during play. And those observations, they then come back and reflect on those observations of what worked well, what didn't work well. So that's just an example. We also do a lot of career development in that piece as well of like, hey, what kind of careers can go into child and youth development? It's just not about early childhood education. It's about youth programming. Like, do you want to be a teacher at a high school? Do you want to be a teacher in a middle school? Do you want to be a probation officer? Or do you want to work at a nonprofit like Heart of Working Corps that works with a various amount of different types of young people in the workforce? And so we expose them to all those different careers as well during this process. Then once they finish the curriculum, they will be taking a certification exam as well. So they'll get their industry recognized certificate, which is also stackable. So they can come in at an entry level, and as they get more experience and more training, they can then reapply and come into the next level and to all the way up to professional as their career grows. We also, so then what we do is we also do a work experience placement. And these young people are getting placed in, during the school year, early childhood education programs. We're working with a relief nursery right at this moment for those placements for those young people to go every single day to actually work with the kids. They're in the classroom about 6 hours a day, working with their mentor teacher alongside with working with the children as well. Then what we do in the summertime, because we're a year-round program, we're going to be placing them into summer day camps with different types of recreation programs throughout our region. Basically, we're making those placements of where the young people live, because we do serve 3 different counties and 6 different cities. And so we're making those placements where the young people live. And the same thing, it's in a summer day camp atmosphere, or we're also working with a camp that's called Camp Tamarack, and they do outdoor school, and they also offer the residential camp experience for those young people to be able to do that as well. So, and then after that, once they finish their hours, they're going to be getting about 400 hours of that work experience placement. And when they graduate from our program, we then follow through for another year of follow-up services with the young people where they're in their placement, their employment placement, or they're in college. They're going to the local community college, which they are now. Our local community college is also building an apprenticeship program for our young people to go into. And this next year, it's free for our young people, which is pretty exciting. So they're going to be going into those programs. And what we do is we have staff on board who meet with our young people on a monthly basis, setting their goals, tracking their employment placement or their college placement as well.
So you're really bringing that full, that full continuum that you were talking about, Miriam, just a few minutes ago, starting with just the experience and the exploration to the exploration and exposure to the full-on engagement and experience before they even graduate from the program. Thank you for sharing that. Kathy Taylor, let's bring you in for a moment and hear about your on-the-ground experience and how you all are, creating work-based learning opportunities for your young people.
Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join with these great panelists. I'm learning stuff already. So I guess I wanted to focus on the fact that I really feel like work-based learning is that continuum that they have talked about. And it's really two-pronged. It's working with the young people. At the same time, it's working with the potential employers. And so we work with both in and out of school youth, mostly out of school youth in our youth build program, but we occasionally, we are a regular charter school, so we can enroll young people of high school age up through age 24. And so when we're working with the young people, we're talking about, yes, that exploration. We will have speakers come in just to start getting them some exposures to careers. And then we also really rely heavily on the supportive services that these young people need to be successful. So helping them get their ID, helping them have appropriate clothing for interviews, having mock interviews, doing paperwork, all those kind of things. So we have a full-time job developer who works specifically with those needs that our young people have, both in the soft skills that they're going to need to be successful about being on time and seeking help when you need it, all these kind of things. How do you call in when you're sick? Some of the basics that sometimes we assume young people know, but they really need help with those things. So those supportive services, those soft skills, looking at the exploration piece, and then also starting to give them some exposure. So helping them to get ready for that first job, and then giving the support that they need for the first job. So they may need transportation to the job. And we do a lot of those specific kind of services that especially rural youth need, because transportation is a huge issue that overcoming that can stand in the way of everything else. So we provide transportation, but we also try to help them to figure out after this first job, and where we can help them, how are they going to be able to get transportation when they do earn their industry recognized certificate and they can move on to a placement. So thinking about that, just leading them gently along, and then helping them to get the credential through the industry recognized certification programs that we have. And then on the other side, working with potential employers, we know that we're always seeking relationships with employers, with potential employers. Sometimes career pathways ebb and flow. We had a great certified nurses assistant program, but unfortunately with the wildfires that came through, just burned out our partner's home and business. So it was like, well, now we don't have that anymore. So now we need to be ready for a new partner that we have, Hill Country Health and Wellness. They are going to help us to have a dental assistant program, medical assistant program, and some of those other things that until our partner who had the tragedy of the fire impacting their lives, so that they can come back and start that CNA program again that will have opportunities for stackable credentials as they move forward. So just always being on the lookout for opportunities. What are the young people interested in? How can we engage partners? And then I know it's been touched on before, but I think it's super important that we work with the employers on their training needs. Like how can we help them to know what our youth are going to need? We also worked really successfully with a career mentor within the organization, so that was set up ahead of time, so that this particular mentor, as we place them, our young people with employers, that they have a particular person they can go to. And then that mentor knows our job developer is at the ready to come on site with them or to help them as they build the job skills and the other skills needed by our young people. And so both of them are going through this continuum slowly, like making sure that everyone has the support they need. And then when it comes time for placement, we try to do as much subsidized employment as we can at first. And then eventually they move on to some kind of full placement or apprenticeship. And then the young people are actually ready to go forward with that. Instead of sometimes it seems like we just we get them a quick credential or certificate, and then we expect them to magically be able to be successful in a new opportunity without having done all this slow, sometimes frustratingly, work that is needed for opportunity youth to really be successful. But I just want to echo what everyone else has said. I really feel like that is super important, that we look at the bigger picture sometimes with rural youth, and especially rural opportunity youth.
Awesome. Thank you, Kathy. So again, echoing what both Amanda and Miriam have said, it's again that continuum that you're creating. And I think that people often don't realize that the importance of that, creating that exposure and that experience, right? As you were just talking, that helps develop those early job skills, right? And helps problem solve and helps, manage some of the challenges that can happen in the learning experiences, both for the young person, but also with the employer. Amanda and Miriam, I wanted to bring you back into this conversation. Amanda, I'm going to swing back to you for a second first. And just really quickly, maybe because Kathy Taylor just mentioned this, you can talk about how we've had a big push over the last decade in the education across both education and workforce, but particularly in high school settings, to really zero in, rightfully so, again, on credentials and certifications. But there's been some trade-offs, as Kathy Taylor was just mentioning. So with that push, particularly for rural communities. So maybe just really briefly talk about that, and from your perspective, and how work-based learning still fits into that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Oh, am I unmuted? Yes, thank you so much, Kim. So I put a question in the chat. I just thought if anyone had a chance, they wanted to try to answer it before I jumped in. It's which factor listed below do you think influences career decision-making for high school learners the most? And I promise, Kim, this is coming around to your question. So if everyone just wants to take a chance, take a stab at it, do you think it's parents, experiences, or teachers that really impact kids' career decision-making at the high school level? And while you're doing that, parents, okay, teachers, all, nice job, Kara. It's actually experiences. So and this comes, and I'll put the link to where this comes from 2018 manufacturers. The manufacturing industry wanted to know, how do we get more people in manufacturing? And so they did this survey and figured out that it's experiences. So what I'm thinking about, Kim, in response to your question is, credentials are really important. Even more than just the credential itself, but the opportunity to show that you can earn that credential, right, is really important. At the same time, I think we cannot underestimate the importance of work-based learning. And I think they don't necessarily have to go hand in hand. And what I would say is, there's a journalist, and I'll put the quote in the chat too later, who said, talent is universal, but opportunity is not. So we have to just think about our rural communities. You know, are we giving them enough exposure to consider the huge range of careers that are out there and the opportunities that are out there for them? Or are we sort of just allowing, you know, the experiences they've had to dictate the careers that they choose to go into or that they even know about, right? And so the last thing I'll just say is I'll put a link in the chat. Neil deGrasse Tyson was asked this question about, you know, why aren't there more girls in STEM? And he has a very funny first response, and I'll let you watch that. But then he says, basically, there's a paradigm of expectations. And so I just think we need to make sure we're thinking about, like, what's the expectation paradigm for our rural learners? And are we giving them enough exposure to industries and to the plethora of industries and careers that they can really have a robust expectation for themselves? And now with, you know, digital opportunities, you know, they can do a lot from home. So just really making sure that we're not, I love the work that Karen, Kathy, and everyone is doing, just also making sure that we're giving them some variety around the options.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda. And I like your quiz that you dropped in. Miriam, I'm going to pull you in for a minute, and I'm going to ask you a two-part question. So we've been putting this in a rural context, but let's really move this conversation and really drill it down for rural. So we've talked now, I think, across all of you about the benefits for work-based learning for young people, how it strengthens, as Amanda, you were just saying, how it strengthens credentials, how it strengthens the readiness for young people. And we've touched on, each of you have mentioned it from an employer perspective, but Miriam, I really want to pull you in to talk about how work-based learning strengthens employer engagement and why that's so important for rural communities and rural economic development in particular. And then my second part of that is to then ask you to flow into that in an apprenticeship context. So I think we've done a great job at picking up on the framework that you laid out in the beginning around work-based learning and what that continuum looks like. But maybe the second part is to flow into, because I think that ties straight to strengthening employer engagement, what the realm of apprenticeship looks like, because that's sort of often, if you're not in the weeds around it, we say apprenticeships, people often think of registered apprenticeships, or they have some very quick definition and they don't understand the range of that, if that makes sense.
It does. And before I jump in, I really wanted to hop on what Amanda was saying about experience. And it's just this quote that I've heard from others around experience, right? You really can't be what you can't see. And so like that experience really matters. And I kind of just wanted to get that out there. But from the employer perspective, employer engagement, employers are really central to the registered apprenticeship model. But with regard to the context of work-based learning, employers can get so much out of providing work opportunities for young people, whether they're in school, whether they're out of school, whatever facet of their lives and their experiences are, employers can really benefit in that participation in the process, right? So they can really design the opportunities for these learners and students to apply their skills, right? So they have an opportunity to be an active participant in building out their pipelines with young people within the rural context, right? So in a rural place, you have schools and there are employers, typically small employers, but if they're looking to grow their workforce, what's the best place or the best supply of potential workers? So definitely their ability to partner with education systems to really figure out the skills that they want to show and demonstrate with students. Employers really can start thinking about their turnover and their productivity by really providing these opportunities to young people And they can really figure out how they can build that pipeline, right? Like, what are those skills that we're going to show these young people? How can we give them meaningful experiences? How do we develop these pre-apprenticeship or apprenticeship opportunities, or even just from the exposure piece, the job shadow? So it's not all from the supply side, the student side of what they can receive from a work-based learning opportunity, but employers are just a critical part in like designing and the implementation aspect of work-based learning. And where this fits in with regard to the registered apprenticeship piece, I think there's a lot of varying understanding about registered apprenticeship, but it's a really structured model that has, structured on the job learning. There's a mentor associated with it. All some of the quality elements that I heard from Kara and Kathy and sort of like their description of their work-based learning activities are included in registered apprenticeship. There's a minimum of 2,000 hours of on-the-job learning. I'm just going through this because registered apprenticeship is very structured, and part of that is this provision of industry recognized credentials. But what's really great that I heard about is, and what's been a trend within the registered apprenticeship system most recently, is the stacking of credentials, right? We want folks to have opportunities where they're benefiting from their experience, right? So including stackable credentials, that really rewards young people in rural communities or in any community for their learning and for their experience, I think is really critical, so that they're leaving the experience with something that's portable that they can take with them to the next opportunity, whether that's post-secondary, whether that's career. And with registered apprenticeship, it is a job from day one, right? So it's not about providing you the skills and then trying to figure out where the employer is in the process, or what happens next. That happens from day one. And I think an opportunity for folks in rural settings is really get to know your landscape, right? Who are the employers? How can we be innovative in thinking about who can provide these services? It could be at your local hospital. It could be at the small, local employer, if that's a manufacturer, or, being really creative around what are the needs of the employers in the area? How can they play an active role in shaping the curricula and the experience for the young person, and then build out their own pipeline of workers? I think focusing on the employer and also the young people, it's like it's a win-win for both. But like, I think creativity is really important in just seeing all of the assets that are available, and then how can we really shape meaningful experiences that can help address employer their needs, their demands, addressing issues like turnover or aging workforce, and then providing young people with the experiences and that can help them make lifelong career decisions.
That was awesome. Thank you. I loved how you also brought in how there can be a relationship between the workforce and the employer side of thing and the educational side of things, right? And so often we see those fragmented. So I want to tack back to Kathy and Kara and Amanda for a second, and let's drill further. Let's pick up on what Miriam was sharing about how this helps strengthen employer engagement. You've all worked with employers. Let's really bring this into a rural context and talk about how that looks different, both why it's important, but how it looks different. And Kathy, I'm going to start with you, Kathy Taylor. I'm going to start with you because you were mentioning anecdotally when you were sharing in the beginning about having nurtured a partnership with someone in the healthcare, only to lose that partnership due to a wildfire, right? A very, dominant rural issue. And there it is, right? Right down to how it affects an individual program and young people. So talk to us about your approach to employer engagement and and how it was that while that was a extremely challenging and horrific thing that happened to that individual, how what else you had going on in terms of employer engagement and how you were able to problem solve. Hold on, Kathy, we got you muted.
So sorry. I think
There you go.
that's what was referring to earlier, just because you do have to always be looking for additional opportunities. I think that that's one of the advantages of being in a rural community, is because you do have the opportunity to build those close relationships with a lot of different employers through our own network, through our staff's network. And because we have those, we have the opportunity to say, okay, well, it looks like we're not right when it happened. I mean, the wildfire was too late to already be developing those other relationships. So not only in the health sciences or the health services pathway, but obviously in other pathways. So the construction pathway, since we have that pathway, all of a sudden we were able to really put a lot more emphasis on that, because we had 1,000 residences that had to be rebuilt. And so the community recovery team really looked to our organization to start rebuilding those homes. And so if we didn't have those partnerships already developed, we wouldn't be able to meet the community's needs at that time. There was something else that I think that both Miriam and Amanda mentioned, was about sometimes our young people don't even know what careers are out there. And so I want to, re-emphasize that is one of the cool things that our job developer can do, is find out what their interests are and really open up their opportunity to something that might not even be in our community. But then I wanted to also bring back that point that sometimes when they have to leave our community to get that job, there is a whole nother set of challenges around that, because we are our young people's network. We have helped them develop it, and we're an important part of it. Some of them don't have the support of parents or other people. And so if they're going to leave, we're going to have to do a lot more work on that, because we have had some young people who have gotten really amazing apprenticeship opportunities out of the area. But as soon as they leave, they've lost that important piece that was buoying them up at that point. So I just wanted to mention that. And someone had something in the chat I noticed about native youth. And so I think that is something that, as at least we were working with some of our Native communities, there's a concern that sometimes that young people will leave the area for an apprenticeship or an opportunity and not come back to support the community and to help with that. And so those are all real issues that I think that we have to be aware of, and we have to build as we're building the relationships with those partners, the potential partners. We also have to be building it with the community itself and the culture of the community, so that we can open opportunities for young people. Obviously, they need every opportunity to go beyond the rural community, but also to make sure that we're looking at the needs of the rural community. And as I said, like when the fires came and we were able and ready to step in. And then in the meantime, we had other partnerships that we were working on, helping to provide food and disperse food during that time. So that got us an even closer relationship with Hill Country Health and Wellness, which is what became a really great opportunity for us to explore the health sciences field. So one opportunity leads to another, and in a rural community, in smaller communities, that is the beauty of it. There's drawbacks because you don't have this mass of employers or that you would have in urban opportunities. So I'm not sure I really hit on your point there. But I wanted to get that in about the opportunities that present themselves when young people leave the community for other opportunities as well.
I think you totally hit on it. Thank you. and really emphasize that need for a very entrepreneurial approach and how all of this is relational. So Kara, let's bring you in for a moment and let's hear from you, because I know you've had a similar experience. So just talk to us about how you've approached employer engagement and how your thoughts on what everyone has shared so far around it.
Yeah, so we have a job developer as well on our staff team, and that job developer really works with, we have created over the years an employer advisory council as well. And right now we have about 23 employers throughout Central Oregon who are on that employer advisory council. And those employers vary from construction to apprenticeship programs to all the way to Mount Bachelor and our ski hill, or our mountain, I guess you could say, as an employer. It includes, employers from the child youth development field as well, and natural resources. So we've had like Forest Service on that Employee Advisory Council. We've had, Bend Parks and Rec, which because, in the natural resources area, there's tons of parks that have to be taken care of as well. And that's what our young people are being trained to do. So what they do when they sign an agreement with us, they agree to volunteer with our programs for mock interviews, tours of their businesses, job shadows. They can become guest speakers. They become mentors in our programs as well. We also, with that job developer, we're creating that pipeline to all those employers. So that job developer is really, really working on that pipeline and then matching the youth to that different career that they want to go through that pipeline. It's been, with our job developer position, has been huge in helping, that job placement for our young people, and then that retention as well. So we do follow our young people for a year after they finish our program. And those are the outcomes that we're getting. We're Department of Labor funded, so we're having to fill those second quarter, fourth quarter placement options or placement outcomes for future funding. And that job developer, I would say, has been the best hiring decision we've ever made.
Thank you so much. So we're going to do a couple of what I like to call sort of round robins. So, buckle up in case you are all getting slightly sleepy. Because I know there's a few more things we want to touch on. So let's just take a moment and each of you really quickly, and I'll name, don't worry, I'll ask each of you to join about what you see. Let's just talk about the challenges very quickly that you've encountered, right? Challenges or pitfalls, so that the audience is aware of that. So you can call it challenges or pressures. And then, so let's do that first. And then we're also going to look at opportunities. So if you want to answer it twofold, without it, being a 10-minute explanation. So Amanda, I'm going to pull you forward first. Tell us what you see as, some of the core challenges. If I was getting started doing this, some of the core challenges, but also opportunities.
Okay, so I would say, I just want to echo what Kathy said about transportation. I think that's like the biggest one. But following that, I would say we often use the wrong messengers to talk about work-based learning and to talk to rural young people. And then I would say the second one is we often don't dig deep enough into the barriers that are preventing them from engaging. So for example, I think that the wrong messengers is we have to make sure, for example, I know a teacher who is a criminal science teacher, criminal justice, and she's a female, but she always brings in male speakers. And so, she needs to be careful about making sure that she's bringing in a diverse range of speakers, even if she has to use Zoom. And then as far as digging in deeper, especially with our rural youth, there might be barriers. In universal design for learning, we say the barrier is in the environment, not in the learner. And I'm not saying rural environments are bad. I'm just saying let's explore where the barrier is that's preventing this learner from engaging. And it might be as simple as they need a photo for their apprenticeship card, and we told them they need to get a passport photo, and they work after school and they can't get there for that photo. So, you know, sometimes there's very simple barriers preventing a wonderful experience.
Fantastic. Kara, let's pull you forward.
Currently, our challenges in a rural environment is hiring of teachers and instructors, especially in the construction industry. You know, it's very hard to compete with, you know, the pay that our construction professionals are getting. And it's also, the other thing too, is when you're hiring somebody out of the industry to work in your programs, you have to train them in solid practices and solid child and youth development as well. And so that's one of the things that we have learned through offering this new curriculum is we are missing the boat on some things of, you know, training our own staff. And that's what we're going to be doing, is training our own staff in what good child and youth development looks like, so they can also then be able to provide that to our young people we're working with. I would say one of the other things is research your area of where the in-demand workforce sectors are. Make sure that you're hitting on those, because if in a rural environment, if a young person goes through this training and then they can't find a job locally, that's an issue, because you're right, transportation comes into play. They don't want to leave their local area. Families don't want them to leave their local area. And so make sure you're researching what your needs are in your area.
Perfect. Thank you. Miriam, you want to chime in with your perspective?
Oh, sure, absolutely. I'll share two challenges that I haven't heard before. One is around how work-based learning and apprenticeship opportunities are funded, right? So that's a major barrier. And, you know, we've had to be creative really in trying to figure out how to braid funds, how to add flexibility and adaptability to the funding structures that are out there. But that's a major barrier. And another is having access to wraparound services and supports. We've had to be creative in, you know, trying to figure out how do we provide mental health supports to learners to help them persist in programming, really looking at the funding streams available, trying to be innovative. And but like a major barrier is that funding for work-based learning and apprenticeships, like, you know, really trying to think around how to make that more flexible and adaptable. And that is likely a policy issue, but it's something that I would urge folks, CBOs and folks in communities to really think about, like, where can you add some flexibility to make your work a little bit easier.
Super, thank you. Kathy Taylor.
I think that trying to think of something unique that someone else hasn't said before. I think when you mentioned starting out, I think it's starting out with reasonable expectations. I think I hit on that earlier, that you're not going to just be able to get some cool training program for a couple, you know, several weeks, and then get students trained on them and have them jump out and get into apprenticeships. But sometimes that's what grants are expecting you to do. So I think that starting out with reasonable expectations, that you're going to have to build a program from the ground up that has staffing, like was mentioned, that is hard to come by, especially people who understand trauma-informed education and support for young people that they need rides, they need mental health and social emotional learning opportunities. They need just the support and networking that you can provide. So, like, to think that you're going to just jump in and make something happen, it really does take the relationship building, both from the employers and from the students, and getting all those pieces in place first before you think you can jump right in. But I know that the funding can be difficult. And so that idea of braiding funding, like we have several different CTE, like State Department of Ed funds that we use, braided with a whole bunch of other things and tons of in-kind from the partners. And that is why building those relationships is both a challenge, but a huge benefit that you get when you get those relationships built.
That's super helpful. Thank you. I wanted to just pull forward one other takeaway that I've heard across this conversation that we didn't talk about directly, but each of you were touching on it in different ways, which is, I think, particularly the role that work-based learning and employer engagement also plays in our community vitality, right? Not just from an economic development side of things, but particularly for rural and Native communities, it's a form of civic engagement. It connects our young people to their community. It's a huge piece that we know is critical and really helps with that retention of rural young people for our communities, right? And the larger sense of civic life and civic engagement, because when they feel connected to employers and they get to have these different opportunities and service opportunities that are all part of work-based learning, it gives them a stronger sense of where they live and pride in their community. So I thought that was a really interesting theme that was actually sort of embedded in what you were each saying. We are at time. So before I close out, I'm going to do that last really super fast round robin, one sentence for the four of you to each just get to come back in and say that one takeaway about why this is important that you want to leave the audience with. So Miriam, I'll hit you first. Not hit you, yeah. Wrong verb to use. I will start with you first.
Well, the one thing I wanted to get out there is that you're not alone, right? So there are folks all around the country that have support, national intermediaries like JFF, like the Kim Finney's group and others that can provide information, resources that can make work-based learning and apprenticeship accessible in rural communities. There are networks of folk working on this. So you're not alone. Definitely reach out to us. We have resources. We can connect you to funding and other opportunities to help make your work easier. So that's the one thing I wanted to get out.
Awesome. That's an important thing. Kara, let's pull you in. What's your one takeaway that you want, or that you want people to take away about work-based learning?
Yeah, I want to take away that the young people, just working with them and the passion that the young people have for the work that they're doing in their communities. So I love it when the young people come back and say, oh my gosh, I went by the house that we built. I took my son or my daughter by the house that I built. And that pride that they have. And then when they come back and they say, hey, guess what? Guess where I'm working? And they're checking in and they're, years down the road that they're saying, these are my successes and how I'm supporting my family because of what you all did while I was in Youth Build or in one of your programs, when at the time you're like, oh my gosh, they did not appreciate what we were doing with them, but truly 3 years, 4 years down the road, they do appreciate it.
Way to center it on the young people. Thank you. Kathy Taylor, let's pull you in.
Yes, I have to just echo again what Kara said. That was mine. Just keep the young people at the center of the programming. So from the very beginning, they need to be involved. Like, what do they want to do? What do they see as ways that we can support them? And then how can we take their interests and work with partners on getting those programs that they're interested in? And then just the community service aspect of it. Just being involved with the community and giving back at every turn whenever happens, and rural communities do that naturally anyway, but having our young people at the center of it opens the doors to partners and to employers. So just keeping the young people at the center of it.
Thank you. Amanda, bring us home. What's your final parting?
I love what everyone's saying. I was going to just say, take an asset-based approach, right, to the communities you're working in. So can you use outdoor recreation? Can you use something that the community is already engaged in to spur work-based learning or to engage young people? But maybe the last thing I want to say is don't judge it based on this year. This year has been hard. People are stressed. So like, it's gonna get better, and I just wanna sort of leave people with hope, because I think all the educators I talked to this year was tough. So I just wanna acknowledge that.
I want to say a huge acknowledgement and thank you to the 4 of you for joining us, for everyone in the audience for taking time to join us. I think between us, I was able to individually get to some of you in your questions, and Amanda and Miriam and others, you were dropping resources in. So a huge thank you for your time to engage in all of this. I want to say shout out to Tyler Owens and to Whitney Kimball Coe with the Rural Assembly and for their willingness to share the platform and all the communications and support around this. And they have been in the wings working the tech magic this afternoon. So a giant shout out to them. If you're not following the Rural Assembly, we strongly encourage you to, and the link to sign up to subscribe to the newsletter, to learn about other events, to queue into a range of issues that face all our rural young people and rural communities. You can learn about all sorts of things. We obviously were just getting this conversation going, which is, I think, actually how all good discussions should be. It leaves you wanting more.